Hello, everybody. How are you all doing? I'm back with another nugget, another piece of wisdom to be curious about, and to think about, and to really take in and explore for yourself. And it's this idea that we are our own captor, but we are also our own liberator. So we are the only person who can save us. We are our own salvation. We are what we are looking for. And again, the piece about this is that doesn't mean that you have to do it all alone. That doesn't mean you can't ask for help. That doesn't mean you may not have or need mentors, tools, guides, techniques, therapists, whatever it is, to help you to remember that, because it is a remembrance journey. But what that means is, when you think about it, imagine a person on the edge of a cliff. We are our own captors, as in we constantly throw ourselves off the cliff. And that is by thinking against ourselves, by criticizing ourselves, by sabotaging ourselves, by reneging on ourselves, by just being really horrible to ourselves and that internal environment, and rejecting ourselves, not loving ourselves, all these kind of ways. We're throwing ourselves off the cliff every time we do that. So we do that. I think it's part of the human makeup and the human experience, that is something that we do. We have this negative bias towards ourselves in our brain programmed, that when you think about it, we're constantly throwing ourselves off the cliff. But the piece of the journey that is super important, that is the journey of starting to go inwards, getting curious, wondering who are you, what it's all about, is there something more? And when you start going into that journey in that space, you see that yes, you're still your own captor, or you throw yourself off the cliff, but you're also there at the bottom to catch yourself every time. And that, for me, that catching of ourselves, that holding of that space, is what we learn through the internal journey. And that is true self-love. That is the true meaning of self-love, that every time we berate ourselves, we reject ourselves, we criticize ourselves, we go against ourselves, we call ourselves all names, we also catch ourselves. We catch ourselves, we hold us, we cherish ourselves, we nurture ourselves, we have compassion for ourselves, we hold ourselves, we understand ourselves, we allow ourselves to be heard. And that's the real piece. So we're not just throwing ourselves off the cliff the whole time and just falling into the abyss. We may throw ourselves off, but we also learn to catch ourselves. And the more that we learn to catch ourselves, the less we throw ourselves off the cliff anymore. And I'm using this analogy as a cliff just to try to give you a visual of what it looks like. And every time we catch ourselves as well, that's like that piece of that inner child healing. We're talking to that wounded part of ourselves that just needs some attention, that's crying out for love, or to be held, or to be heard, or whatever it is. So the more that we do that piece, the less that we'll throw ourselves off the cliff, so to speak. And the more that will be our innate being. And that, for me, is true self-love. It is catching ourselves every time. And because when you think about it, and even when I work with clients, I don't want any client to be dependent on me and to want to help them for years and years and years, because that to me doesn't serve. That to me doesn't make sense, because then that person is becoming dependent and not knowing their own power, because we are all our own coach and source of everything. But again, we don't know that. So for me, and that is the self exploration, the self-healing journey, whatever you want to call it, it is knowing ourselves and being our own coach, and learning the tools and the skills and the mindset to constantly catch ourselves, to self-soothe, to hold ourselves, to give ourselves that space and attention that we're looking for. So, and there's lots of other different bits in there, because like I said, it's kind of nurturing that inner child part. And we all have an inner child that is wounded, every single one of us. And that doesn't mean something traumatic had to happen, but we all have, either a sense of some form of rejection, or maybe it's abandonment issues, or not feeling good enough, or not feeling worthy. And, these can happen through a multitude of ways. So when we learn that that's the part of us that's looking for attention, well, we learn to reparent and become the parent and give that part of us that space, and we catch ourselves. And in that catching constantly, that self-soothing, we are our liberator, because then we come out of that need to constantly go against ourselves, to fight ourselves, to sabotage, to reject ourselves, to speak harshly against ourselves. We eventually move out of that space. It still happens, but it happens less and less and less and less and less, because you've become your own liberator. You've learned to catch yourself as well, to hold that space. And that brings inner freedom. That brings liberation. So let me know what you think about this week's little wisdom piece. And again, it's just inviting you to be curious and to think about it, and think how you go against yourself, and how you maybe throw yourself off the cliff. And then notice, are you catching yourself, or are you allowing yourself to stay there, wallow? And if you are, how can you begin to catch yourself? How can you begin to self-soothe? And if you need support, reach out, whether it's me, whether it's someone else. Connect with someone, engage with someone or something to help in that process, to self-soothe yourself, connect back to wholeness, and bring in that true self-love, and ultimately liberate yourself. Enjoy.